Imagine you're sitting in this hearing and watching the questions unfold. A member of Congress asks for a timeline. She asks who is in charge. She asks what security resources were deployed. She asks why a man with a rifle and a direct line of sight to the president was able to reach a rooftop before the shooting. And the answers coming back seem to raise even more questions. And then comes the moment when the questioning turns blunt. Why are you still sitting here? Welcome back to the Political Brief. Today we're looking at a heated congressional exchange over the security failures surrounding the attempted assassination of President Trump. Subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and tell me what you think in the comments. Because as we go through this exchange, there are some questions here that I think every American, regardless of political party, should want answered.
Recognizes Ms. Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Cheadle, I'd like to remind you that you're under oath. The site team has a senior supervisor, an advanced team, a protective intelligence team, a counter sniper element, and detail. Who was the agent in charge? How long has she been the agent in charge? And what is her Secret Service background?
So I'm not going to provide a name.
Why not? You're here to answer our
In this
questions.
forum, I'm not going to provide names of.
You stated in your testimony, you said, I am here today to answer your questions.
That is correct.
Answer the question.
I'm not going to provide names of our personnel. To
Why
this
not?
committee today.
The American people are demanding these answers from you today, Ms. Cheadle.
I will do the best to provide you accurate information based on the facts that I have at this time.
You're not answering our questions. The advance element coordinates with other intel or law enforcement partners, identifies threats and weaknesses at the sites and movements. We'd like a copy of the advance report. Have you brought it here with you today?
We will comply with the request for the documentation that has been requested.
When will that be, Ms. Cheadle? Because you should have brought it today.
I am certain that our personnel are working on obtaining all of that documentation.
I don't believe you, and neither do the people watching this hearing. You're not doing well, as Mr. Moskowitz informed you. You've been sitting here for over 3 hours, and I have you know the entire country is demanding you resign and demanding that you be fired if you do not resign. Things are not going well for you. You need to answer the questions. Was there a protective intelligence team, and what technical resources were utilized for that event, specifically drone or helicopter assets?
There were a number of technical assets that were deployed for that event, and there was a protective intelligence team that was assigned to that event.
Why was Crooks able to fly a drone over the entire area the day of the rally and the day of his assassination attempt?
To my knowledge, he did not fly the drone over the entire area.
How did he fly a drone over the area, period? Any part of the area?
Again, I would have to go back and check the timeline of when that took place and when the event.
Why didn't you bring the timeline with you today to answer our questions?
I don't have all of the answers on the timelines based on the criminal investigation.
Were you not prepared today to answer our questions?
I am prepared to answer the questions based on the information and wanted to be able to provide.
Do you have a timeline do you have a timeline at all from any of the day?
I have a timeline that does not have specifics.
That's shocking. That is absolutely unacceptable. That means you are a failure at your job. Let's talk about things that are prohibited in Trump rallies. And I've been to a lot of Trump rallies. Backpacks and bags, bicycles, firearms, any type of weapon, or any other item determined to be a potential safety hazard, like a rangefinder would be one. At 5:10, Crooks is first observed by one of the snipers, AGR Sniper 1, at the building. 5:10, President Trump was shot in the face at 6:11 p.m. 5:28, AGR Sniper 1 takes a picture of a bicycle and 2 bags. Those belong to Crooks. 5:32, AGR Sniper 1 spots Crooks looking at his phone and using a rangefinder. 5:55, Butler ESU Command confirms receipt of photos and states they have been relayed on. 6:05 p.m., AGR Sniper 1 later communicates that Crooks is seen moving northeast in direction of Sheets and that Crooks has a backpack. 2 minutes before the shooting, while President Trump has been allowed to take the stage, people see Crooks laying on his stomach in a sniper position on the roof, and they're yelling he has a gun, and they are trying to alert law enforcement and Secret Service. Why was Crooks not shot by the snipers? Why was he allowed to be there?
As soon as the individual was identified as a threat, they were...
No. What do you consider to be a threat? A man with a gun laying in a sniper position, a man that had a backpack, a man that had a bicycle, a man that had a rangefinder. At what point is he determined a threat?
An individual with a backpack is not a threat. An individual with a rangefinder is not a threat.
What about a man laying on a building that has direct line of sight of President Trump with a gun that people are screaming and pointing out? Is that a threat, Ms. Cheadle?
Once that individual was identified, they were neutralized.
No, they were neutralized. Crooks was neutralized after he shot President Trump in the face, Ms. Cheadle. Is he only a threat once he fires the weapon?
As soon as the counter sniper identified that individual, they were able to neutralize them.
How were people in the crowd? Okay, then let's just take it this way. People under your command did not consider him to be a threat, yet people in the crowd knew he had a gun and considered him to be a threat. That means that you are a complete failure as the director of the Secret Service, that people under your command don't perceive a man laying on a roof with direct line to the president with a gun. They don't perceive that to be a threat, yet the people in the crowd do. How is that possible?
That's the last question, but please answer the question, Ms. Director.
I'm not certain at this time how the information from the people in the crowd was relayed to any law enforcement personnel.
No, you knew, that everyone knew. The people there knew that there was a danger. They knew there was a threat to President Trump, and it was allowed to happen. Was there a stand-down order, Ms. Cheadle? Was there a conspiracy to kill President Trump?
Absolutely not.
Then how did this happen? And why are you still sitting here not turning in your letter of resignation?
Last question, but please answer, and then I'll recognize Ms. Presley. Please answer that question. Director.
That is what we are investigating to determine.
We're waiting for your letter. We are waiting for your letter of resignation, and you really need to consider doing that before you leave today.
Chair now recognizes Ms. Presley from Massachusetts.
Thank you. No one.
Right from the beginning, you can tell this isn't going to be a friendly conversation. The questioning starts with something that sounds pretty straightforward. Who was responsible for the Secret Service operation that day? And instead of getting a direct answer, the witness refuses to provide the name of the person in charge. Now, I understand that there can be legitimate security concerns when you're talking about Secret Service personnel. There are names, operational details, intelligence methods, and security procedures that obviously shouldn't just be thrown out publicly without consideration. But here's the problem. This isn't an ordinary congressional hearing about some minor administrative mistake. We're talking about an assassination attempt against a sitting president. So when members of Congress ask who was responsible for particular elements of the security operation, Americans are going to expect a very serious explanation for what can and cannot be disclosed. And if something can't be disclosed, then explain why. Don't just say, "I'm not going to provide that." Because when the public is trying to understand how a presidential security perimeter failed so dramatically, vague answers aren't going to build confidence. And that's exactly what happens next. The committee asks for the advance report, the document that should explain how the location was assessed before the president arrived. The response is basically that the agency will comply with the request. But the member questioning her isn't satisfied. And honestly, I understand why. If you're appearing before Congress specifically to explain a catastrophic security failure, you would expect the relevant documentation to be readily available, or at the very least, for the witness to have a clear explanation of what exists, who has it, and when Congress can expect it. Instead, we're hearing variations of, "We'll get back to you." That phrase has become one of the most frustrating phrases in government. We'll get back to you. We'll investigate. We're reviewing it. We don't have that information today. Now, sometimes those answers are legitimate. Investigations take time. Information can be incomplete. Witnesses don't know everything. But there comes a point where the public starts asking a very simple question. How are you not prepared? And that brings us to one of the biggest issues in this exchange, the timeline. The member of Congress asks whether the witness has a timeline of what happened that day. And the answer is essentially that there is a timeline, but it doesn't contain all the specifics. That is an astonishing answer when we're talking about a security incident involving a presidential assassination attempt. Think about the basic questions Americans want answered. When was the suspect first spotted? When did law enforcement first receive information about him? When was he identified as suspicious? When was the firearm observed? When did the counter-sniper team know about him? When did the crowd start reporting that somebody was on the roof? When was the president informed? When did the Secret Service know? When did local law enforcement know? And most importantly, when did someone conclude that this person represented an immediate threat to the president? Those aren't unreasonable questions. Those are the questions. And the exchange gets even more serious when the questioning turns toward the drone. The member asks how the suspect was able to fly a drone around the area before the rally. The witness says she would need to check the timeline. Again, I want to be fair. A congressional hearing isn't necessarily the place where one person will have every single operational detail memorized. But if you're the head of the agency responsible for protecting the president, appearing before Congress after an assassination attempt, you should expect extremely detailed questioning. And the American people deserve extremely detailed answers. Then we get to the part of the hearing that, in my opinion, really drives home why people were so angry. The questioning turns to the items that were prohibited at the rally. Backpacks, bags, bicycles, firearms, potential safety hazards, rangefinders, and then the member lays out a sequence of events involving the suspect. According to the timeline being presented during the questioning, the suspect was observed well before the shooting. There were photographs. There were reports. There was allegedly a rangefinder. There was a backpack. There was a bicycle. And then, critically, the suspect eventually reached a position on a rooftop that gave him a line of sight toward the president. Now pause right there, because this is where I think every American should forget about party politics for a moment. Forget whether you voted for Trump. Forget whether you voted against Trump. Forget whether you're a Republican, Democrat, Independent, Conservative, Liberal, whatever. Imagine you're responsible for protecting a president. You have an individual positioned on a roof near the event. You have reports from people in the crowd that someone has a gun. You have people pointing toward that individual. You have a person apparently positioned in a way that could provide a line of sight toward the stage. At what point does that become a threat? That's the question. And the witness's response becomes the central point of the confrontation. The member of Congress asks whether an individual with a backpack is a threat. No. What about someone with a rangefinder? No. What about someone lying on a roof with a direct line of sight to the president and reportedly possessing a firearm? And then we get the response that once the individual was identified as a threat, he was neutralized. But that's exactly where the member of Congress pushes back. Because the suspect wasn't neutralized before firing. He was neutralized after the shooting. That's the distinction that matters. And this is where I think the questioning is strongest. The purpose of presidential security isn't simply to eliminate the attacker after the attacker fires. The purpose is to prevent the attacker from getting to that point in the first place. That's the entire reason there are advance teams. That's why there are intelligence personnel. That's why there are counter-sniper teams. That's why there are law enforcement officers. That's why the area is supposed to be secured. The goal is prevention. Now, we should be careful with the language here. A security failure does not automatically prove that there was a conspiracy. It doesn't automatically prove that somebody intentionally allowed the attack to happen. And it certainly doesn't prove that there was a stand-down order. Those are serious allegations, and they require evidence. The witness is explicitly asked whether there was a conspiracy to kill President Trump, and she says no. So we shouldn't take an unresolved investigation and turn it into a proven conspiracy simply because the security failures are difficult to explain. But, and this is a very big but, the absence of evidence for a conspiracy doesn't mean the failures shouldn't be investigated aggressively. Those are two completely different things. You don't have to believe in a conspiracy to believe that something went terribly wrong. And frankly, that's where I think this hearing should be focused. What went wrong? Who knew what? What did they know it? Who communicated with whom? Why wasn't the rooftop properly secured? Why wasn't the threat identified earlier? Why weren't the warnings from people in the crowd effectively acted upon? Why was the president allowed to remain exposed? And who bears responsibility for those failures? Those questions aren't partisan. They're institutional. And this is where I think conservatives have a legitimate concern about accountability in government. We constantly hear about accountability. We're told that government agencies are going to conduct reviews. We're told that new procedures will be implemented. We're told that mistakes will be learned from. But what happens when something goes catastrophically wrong? Does anyone actually lose their job? Does anyone resign? Does anyone face consequences? Or does the public simply get another report explaining what happened, followed by promises that it won't happen again? That's not enough. When you're talking about protecting the President of the United States, the standard should be extraordinarily high. And the fact that the shooter was able to fire at the President at all should be enough to trigger a relentless examination of the entire security operation. Not because we need somebody to blame for political theater, because we need to know how to prevent it from happening again. And then there's another part of this hearing that I think deserves attention: the role of the people in the crowd. According to the questioning, people were reportedly shouting and pointing toward the suspect. That's deeply disturbing. Think about how backwards that is. The ordinary people attending the rally aren't supposed to be the ones identifying an armed individual positioned near the president. They're supposed to be protected by the security operation. The crowd should be able to watch the speech. The security professionals should be watching the rooftops. The public shouldn't have to become the surveillance system. And if members of the crowd were able to see something that trained personnel didn't, or saw it and couldn't effectively communicate it, that deserves an extremely serious investigation. Because the whole purpose of having highly trained security personnel is to identify threats before they become attacks. And then comes the question that, from a political perspective, was probably the most explosive moment. Why are you still sitting here? The member of Congress tells the witness that people across the country are demanding her resignation. Now, personally, I think that's where we have to be careful. A congressional hearing isn't a criminal trial, and public anger by itself shouldn't determine someone's guilt. But leadership has consequences. If an agency suffers a major operational failure under your watch, you have to be willing to answer whether you are still the right person to lead that agency. And resignation isn't necessarily an admission of criminal wrongdoing. Sometimes it's accountability. Sometimes the leader of an institution takes responsibility because the institution failed. That's what leadership is supposed to mean. And let's remember the stakes here. This wasn't just a security failure involving an ordinary public event. The person on that stage was a former president and, at the time of the shooting, the presumptive Republican nominee for president. The attack didn't just endanger Donald Trump. It endangered members of the crowd. It endangered law enforcement. It endangered the democratic process itself. Because imagine what could have happened if the attack had been more successful. Imagine the chaos. Imagine the political violence. Imagine the uncertainty. Imagine what it would have done to an already divided country. That's why I don't think Americans should be satisfied with political spin from either side. Republicans shouldn't be satisfied with simply saying the Secret Service failed. Democrats shouldn't respond by simply saying, "Stop politicizing it." Neither side gets to end the conversation there. We need facts. We need timelines. We need documentation. We need accountability. And we need the truth. If the investigation ultimately finds that this was a series of incompetence, communication failures, planning failures, and security mistakes, then say that. If it finds individual misconduct, hold those individuals accountable. If it finds broader institutional failures, fix the institution. And if it finds evidence of intentional wrongdoing, then follow that evidence wherever it leads. That's what I want. Not a predetermined political conclusion. Not a conspiracy theory manufactured for clicks. Not a government agency simply telling us, "Trust us." I want the facts. Because when the President of the United States can be targeted by an armed attacker from a nearby rooftop, the American people deserve to know exactly how that happened. And I think that's ultimately why this exchange hits so hard. It's not just about Donald Trump. It's not just about Republicans. It's not even just about the Secret Service. It's about whether Americans can trust the institutions responsible for protecting the people who lead this country. And if the answer is that there were failures, then somebody needs to own those failures. That's not revenge. That's accountability. And if you're a conservative watching this, I think this is an important distinction to remember. Demanding accountability doesn't mean automatically believing every allegation. You can demand transparency while waiting for evidence. You can criticize an agency without accusing every employee of being corrupt. You can believe the security operation failed without claiming that a conspiracy has been proven. And that's where I stand on this. I don't need a conspiracy theory to tell me that the questions raised in this hearing deserve answers. The American people deserve to know what happened. They deserve to know who knew what and when. They deserve to know why warnings weren't acted upon. They deserve to know how an armed suspect reached a position where he could fire at a president. And they deserve to know whether the people responsible for protecting the president did everything they were supposed to do. Because if they didn't, we're investigating cannot be the end of the story. There needs to be accountability. There needs to be reform. And most importantly, there needs to be a system that makes sure this never happens again. So now I want to hear from you. After watching this exchange, do you think the Secret Service leadership gave Congress satisfactory answers? Do you think resignation is warranted after the security failures described here? Or should Americans wait for the complete investigation before deciding who should be held responsible? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more political reactions and commentary from a conservative perspective, make sure you subscribe to The Political Brief, hit the like button, and share this video. Because when something this serious happens, Americans deserve answers, not excuses.